This is Counterpoint.
Earlier this month, Israel was again under attack. Iran's terror proxy Islamic Jihad fired hundreds of rockets on the Jewish state.
Iran is a state sponsor, industrial level, of terror. It builds militias in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, like Hezbollah, the flagship of its enterprise. And within the Palestinian territories, actually seeking to derail whatever chance there is for conciliation and peacemaking.
The European Parliament will have to underline that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization as a whole, entirely. There is not a political arm and a terrorist arm. I will never forget the picture standing in the area of the Golan Heights and seeing beyond the border where the threat comes from. Israel is our strong partner, and that's why the Transatlantic Friends of Israel group in this European Parliament is an important factor to make a difference in the future relations between EU and Israel.
Welcome to Counterpoint, recorded here in the studios of the European Parliament. Earlier this month, Israel was again under attack. Iran's terror proxy Islamic Jihad fired hundreds of rockets on the Jewish state. Though Israel Iron's Dome intercepted most of them and a major war was narrowly avoided, Israeli civilians, their homes and schools were the target. Up on Israel's northern border, the regime's deadly proxy Hezbollah is still entrenched and armed to the teeth, with some 150,000 missiles aimed at Israeli cities, including an estimated 500 guided missiles. Here to discuss Israel's multifaceted security challenges, Europe's potential role in preventing another major war, and more broadly, the EU-Israel partnership, I'm joined by a member of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, Lukas Mandl, who also heads the Transatlantic Friends of Israel group, and Brigadier General in Reserve, Assaf Orion, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. Thank you both for joining us to this show today.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much. Turning first to you, Mr. Orion, you have literally been, over the past years, on the front lines of Israel's wars defending itself. Perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about the recent attacks coming from the Gaza Strip and tell us, enlighten us about what the game is Iran is playing both in Gaza and in Lebanon, and most importantly, what can Europe do to prevent the next war?
Good morning, and thank you for the question. On the tactical level, we're seeing incoming rockets and mortars flying from adjacent areas to Israel, like the Gaza Strip or Syria, targeting our populace. And they are being launched by militias. Those militias have their own political agendas, but the equipment, training, funding, and so on all come from Iran. So we're actually looking at a grand design by which Iran is waging an indirect proxy war by equipping and building regional militia, targeting Israel, targeting Saudi Arabia, targeting the UAE, because Yemen is a similar example. And Iran itself is seemingly out of the operational circuit. So when people ask, did they really command that strike to happen? No, they just set the table and allowed the locals to decide when. So that's on this side. What should be done? First thing is to recognize the truth. The truth is Iran is a state sponsor, industrial level, of terror. It builds militias in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, like Hezbollah, the flagship of its enterprise. And within the Palestinian territories, actually seeking to derail whatever chance there is for conciliation and peacemaking in Israel, and that's been the case for several decades. They need to be recognized as terror sponsors. The militias have to be recognized as terror organizations. The dispersion or the proliferation of arms needs to be addressed as an embargo resolution, and they need to be enforced. Now, the fact that there is a very severe nuclear case should not dissuade us from dealing with Iran's other arm, because those two arms are mutually reinforcing. The nuclear case is telling everybody, don't deal with my conventional arm, and the conventional arm dissuades everybody from trying to address Iran on the nuclear front.
Thank you for that overview. Turning next to Hezbollah, you already hinted at it. There are some in Europe and across the world who believe that somehow by designating this group in its entirety as a terrorist organization would destabilize the country, would have a ripple effect across the region in a negative way. Maybe you can give us quickly your take on this let's say, view of the situation from Israel.
First of all, the truth shall set us free. We need to call a spade a spade. If it's a terror organization which is responsible for hundreds of Western deaths and for hundreds of thousands of Syrian deaths, this is a terror organization. Now, the stability we all seek to achieve is actually today a hostage situation, because Hezbollah, as a terror organization, just took over the Lebanon's political system. So are we trying to achieve stability at the cost of losing the rest of Lebanon? I think that's a bad choice. Stability is not divinity. You don't worship stability for its own sake. Plus, the trajectory of Hezbollah's force buildup, and specifically the precision missile project, has already been declared by Israel as unacceptable. The threat level is going to be too high. Israel will need to try to prevent it, even to preempt it. And so, as the days pass and we see this process progressing, we're actually inching step by step into a devastating war between Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and Iran, maybe Israel and Syria and Iraq, because we sanctify stability in Lebanon and not willing to take even the first political diplomatic move, which is naming the problem as it is.
Thank you. Mr. Mandl, turning next to you. You just came back from Israel together with a delegation of members of the European Parliament, members of the Transatlantic Friends of Israel group on an AJC seminar. And as part of this program, you visited the kibbutz Nahal Oz, which is pretty much a stone's throw away from the Gaza Strip. If you could just give us a sense of the feeling on the ground, how are people holding up, and what can be said about the mentality of the people on the ground?
Thanks again for the invite, and thanks, General Orion, for sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with my colleagues and me in European Parliament, because it's important for our decisions to get aware of the real situation on the ground in Israel, not only by visiting Israel, which is important, but also by always staying in contact and having interaction with people with knowledge and experience like General Orion. So it's really a pleasure to have you in European Parliament. My overall experience in the kibbutz was a very, very positive one. There are people living together, raising their families, working hard, paying taxes, being regular citizens, strengthening their state in a very, very special form of living together in this community of the kibbutz on the one side. And on the other side, as you have mentioned, they are very, very close to the Gaza Strip. They are very, very close to daily threats from terrorist groups. And that's what I mean when I always mention that there is no neutrality. I also say that as an Austrian elected official especially, there is no neutrality between terrorism and civilization. It's clear that the Israeli state has established a civilization in the ancient home of the Jewish people for decades now. And it's clear that this civilization is under threat by terrorist groups on each and every border. And that's why I actually adore the people who do not only accept this risk, but deal with it. And they deal with it in a positive way. They live their daily lives. They strengthen their community. And they have decided, as my impression is the whole state of Israel, the whole Israeli society has decided for decades to do both things at the same time. And maybe that's the secret of the success of this state also in economic terms, to be at war because that's the expression for what's really happening, to be under threat and being attacked several times a month, like this month, for example.
Yes.
And being attacked does not mean being attacked only on a military level towards military targets, but the civilians are attacked by terrorist groups. That's something we have to be aware of, about in European Union. Having said that, the one thing that's done by the society and the state of Israel, Israel also has decided not to stop to create this state in the beginning and to strengthen this state, to strengthen the economy, to strengthen the education system, science, innovation, academia. What led to today's situation that Israel has the largest number of startups per capita in the world, for example. Israel is an innovation partner, technology partner, and also a state that provides security not only for its own people, but also for the whole region. And that means also for Europe. For us Europeans, we can sleep better due to the security structure Israel provides. And that's something we have to be aware about when we decide who is our partner on a global scale. Who is the only democracy, the only rule of law state in the region? It's Israel. So due to European values, due to our own security, and also due to economic relations, the future wealth, Israel is our strong partner, and that's why the Transatlantic Friends of Israel group in this European Parliament is an important factor to make a difference in the future relations between EU and Israel.
Thank you. You spoke of the strong link and the value of our Western civilization being connected through with Israel through our partner across the pond in the United States and with Europe right in between. This partnership goes much deeper than the values. It has a lot to do with the security partnership that you already alluded to. I'd like to hear your thoughts, because part of your delegation of the TFI group was also standing up on the Golan Heights, viewing Hezbollah's positions in houses of civilians close by, and seeing almost all the way over to Damascus. Talk to us, if you could, about why you believe the European Union is having a hard time really designating this group in its entirety a terrorist organization, and what do you believe the Parliament's role could be in advancing this important process that threatens not only Israel but threatens Europe and the whole West?
Frankly, the European Parliament speaks on behalf of the European people. It's the elected body of the European Union. It's frankly the only parliament European Union has, and the only common parliament Europe ever had in history. I do claim that in the beginning, because we speak on behalf of the people as European Parliament, and usually we are pioneers in recognizing situations and in anticipating what's necessary for the future. And also in this field, European Parliament will have to underline that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization as a whole, entirely. There is not a political arm and a terrorist arm, because what would a political arm do for a terrorist organization? It's also part of terrorism. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, and the European Parliament will have to clearly underline that. I will never forget the picture standing in the area of the Golan Heights and seeing beyond the border where the threat comes from, and where people are who intend daily to attack civilians. My home country, Austria, has decided a few years ago to ban Hezbollah symbols in the Austrian public. They are prohibited now. And it's important to make clear statements like this, to forbid symbols like this if they are symbols of terrorist organizations and support terror, support attacks against civilians. And one of my main tasks in this parliament is that in this case, but also in all other issues regarding Hezbollah, the European Parliament follows the Austrian example and follows the clear understanding that Hezbollah, to all our knowledge, without any doubt, is a terrorist organization.
Thank you. I'd like to switch gears very quickly and take a look at Syria. And we've seen over the past years that Russia has established a foothold there. Israel woke up one day with a big bear in its neighborhood. If you could talk to us about how, as an Israeli commander, or how military decisions are made based on rule of law, based on democracy, and how that sort of conflicts with all other actors in the region, and how Israel has to cope with this with this situation, being a military that adheres to international law.
First of all, you have to embrace complexity. We're operating in a complicated theater. When you look at Syria, and rebel Syrians alone were over 1,100 factions during the years of the civil war. And there are foreign forces there with Iranians, with Russians, with Turks, with black flags, well, you need to be quite acquainted with your environment. Second, you need to understand that unlike the paradigmatic thinking about peace and war dichotomy, day and night, these guys adopt a gray zone mentality, and they try to keep off the clear distinction. Third is when they try to attack you, many of them use, as I said before, on Gaza and in Lebanon and Hezbollah, indirect fire, rocketry, which are aimed to hit your populace without going through your army first. So it challenges the government, military, people trinity. It always shakes or try to shake the confidence between them. When you go after them and defeat them because they're shooting from within their populated areas at our populated areas, that's a double war crime. You need to make sure that on your way to victory, you don't self-defeat by giving in your values, by trashing your morale. You need to gain victory and stay humane. So if you just go in a careless manner and you see a military or terror target embedded inside populated areas, and you just, flatten the place like some of our neighboring countries do, well, it won't be Israel anymore. No. I'm not talking about external decry. I'm talking about who we are and which kind of people we want to be. And so we've developed a specific set of procedures, looking at the legality, at the proportionality, at the actual utility, at how to strike in a surgical way and hit as little collateral as possible. So it's actually it's a sublime form of using force, as little as possible and not as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, you're fighting with people who co-inhabit your environment, and they are your neighbors for tomorrow. So you need to take action. The bad people need to be taken out. The rest of them need to stay afterwards, and for one day, perhaps we'll reach peace with them. What you could see in Syria, Israel reached out to border communities, cross-border communities in Syria. 5,000 Syrians were treated in Israeli hospitals. And that was based on the fact that we both knew that we're here to stay, or there to stay, and we better look at tomorrow and not only at today. So tomorrow was a very good bridge for peaceful conduct between or on both sides of the Syrian border during those tough years. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Orion, you've just outlined how Israel really sticks out as a bastion of democracy and human rights. I'd like to change gears very quickly on an issue unrelated to the issue we're talking about previously. Just recently, the EU Court of Justice decided that it will be obligatory to label Israeli foodstuffs produced beyond the Green Line. And instead of Europe taking active steps to deepen ties with Israel, it seems that the Commission decision going ahead of this in 2015 seems to have been at odds with that. Having just returned from Israel, Mr. Mandl, what do you think Europe should do to tackle the potential backlash coming from the BDS movement aiming to boycott Israel, and how can we get a positive agenda back on the road?
Thanks for the question, and in some respect, things are definitely related. I'm a person who defends rule of law each and every day, and I underline that because it's clear to me I accept court decisions. What else would I do? I'm part of the legislative body, and I accept court decisions, but nevertheless I have a different opinion. And my opinion is that we as Europeans must not be naive on how decisions like this are misused for things like sanctions, BDS activities against Israel, which are targeting not only the Jewish population of Israel, but, for example, also the Palestinian population of Israel, because a lot of Palestinian employees, workers, small and middle-sized enterprises in the regions which are meant here and which are relevant here are targeted and are affected if sanctions like this are in place. And sanctions will be easier if goods have to be additionally labeled like this. And that's why I have a different opinion, and I will always fight against sanctions like this. All of this is in the framework of double standards, different views on Israel than on any other state in the world, which we also sometimes face in the United Nations, where Israel is treated differently than others. And then the road to questioning and doubting the right to exist for the state of Israel is already open if we begin with double sanctions. So we have really to fight double standards, I wanted to say, and we have to fight each and every approach that doubts the right of Israel to exist. The moment of weakness can create new strength. And this court decision is a moment of weakness for Europe, in my view, but it can create strength by motivating my colleagues and me in European Parliament, and also the new Commission. I will also underline that Josep Borrell, the new Foreign Affairs Commissioner and High Representative of the Council on Foreign Affairs, will have to focus on that issue, can motivate us to strengthen everything we have to do to reconvene the Association Council between EU and Israel, and to work on a new agreement, because the old agreement is nearly 20 years old now, and the world was really in a very different shape 20 years ago than it is today, and it will be, as far as we can anticipate that, in the coming up years. And that's why we all have the interest. It's the interest of the European Union, hopefully also of Israel, I guess, to strengthen the ties by reconvene the Association Council and to create a new association agreement with Israel, and also see Israel as a much more important partner in the EU neighborhood policy than in the past.
Thank you. Perhaps, Mr. Orion, you wish to comment on the recent decision of the court and BDS more general?
As a strategic planner, I often rely on analysis of ends, ways, and means. Like, what is the purpose that some move or method is trying to serve? What's the probability that we will indeed serve it? And what other implication it might bring? Well, sanctioning those settlements needs to be tested against, does it promote Israeli-Palestinian peace or conditions for such peace in the future? Does it allow the European Union to play a relevant role in that future aspiration? Or does it only serve a quest for weakening, isolating, punishing Israel as a purpose of itself? And in my view, the chances that this will promote peace are slim, because the center of gravity for peace is within the Israeli and the Palestinian publics. And whatever comes from the outside to the Israeli system as an assault on some part of the Israeli polity will only tighten the wagon circle and create a larger consensus. It won't make life easier, but tougher. Europe taking the high moral pulpit, preaching to Israel instead of helping out from the bottom up, will not make Europe more relevant. Actually, I would ask, did Europe turn more relevant in the recent years to Middle Eastern peacemaking or to the process as a whole? I think less. And last is that BDS in general is a great vehicle to people who try to fight Israel in a war by other means, not militarily, politically, judicially, legally, economically, culturally, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to take our eyes above the means to the purpose and then ask what's the best way to serve that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Mandl. Thank you, Assaf Orion. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Please tune in again next month for Counterpoint.